All right, so today we are taking a break from some of our regular scheduled conversations and topics to kind of focus in. So, as you know, here on this channel, whether it's her Royal Roots, or today, where it's Huldah speaking for Huldah. So today I'm speaking for me, not for a community, not for an organization, not for ministerial purposes, but I'm using this platform today to bring some clarity, one, to some definitions, two, to some recent things that have happened within the media that probably directly affect a little bit of everyone. And I wanted to kind of give a dialogue or begin a dialogue around the topic of one, prejudice, anti-Semitism, and something that I didn't think would be such a negative thing, but thinking. Thinking. As many of you know, I'm an educator, not just on this platform, but my education, my degree is in education. And more to the end of educational psychology and how thinking works or how learning works for the individual. And on this channel, what we do is kind of dive into a lot of, how that happens and using it in a biblical context in order to give us literally a better life in general. And so when certain things happen in the media, and as a person of color, I think it is a little additionally triggering when so-called black people are not allowed to think or to voice their thoughts or to process what the information they're getting, because it stems back to, for me, and it may not feel like this for other people, but it stems or roots back into the issues regarding slavery and the ability for black people to think and express and have dissenting thoughts about things happening in the world around them. And so I try to stay, and if you search this channel and go through, I stay very, very far away from a lot of political things. I have opinions, I have written about them, I have shared them, but that is not the overall narrative or the purpose of not only just my voice, but what I'm supposed to do both as an educator and as a person who feels like they have a personal passion for the connection between the biblical studies and the way our lives should function in a holistic fashion. But after the second event occurred, and I'm also, if some of you don't know this, I'm not a super huge news person. I like to, I don't ascribe to any political party. I'm not affiliated with Black Lives Matter. I have spoken against pretty much a little bit of everything because I believe my position should be the most as non-biased, and I will often tell you what my biases are because it's important to also know what they are. But when it comes to political things, I have no dog in any fight. I really could, and with all due respect to all of you who have political affiliations, I could care less. Because I know that my stance is to be under the Creator, to love all people, to do my job, to be a light, and to stand up in the face of all injustice. That is Torah. Torah tells us to seek justice, and it doesn't matter who it's for, and it doesn't matter why we're seeking it. That should be our focus under the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. So when it comes to these two issues, or these two instances that really caused me to begin thinking about the world we even live in today, and the voice that we have to use it, and also the mind that we have to think with it, and even if those thoughts don't agree with people, how it's kind of slipping through the cracks. So last week, two individuals, and I don't have any affiliation with any of these people. I don't even really care for sports in that way. But I was actually out grabbing some lunch, and the news is on, and I see, I think his name is Steven Jackson. He's the guy who's like leading the George Floyd protests. And he's on the news, and I see him talking to Don Lemon, and on the bottom of the screen, I see anti-Semitism, and I'm like, what does anti-Semitism have to do with police brutality? So the volume was down, and so I was waiting for my food. You know, it was a pickup delivery, and so I walk over to the television to hear what's being said, and so I'm over here, because obviously it wasn't something I was trying to hear. The conversation between Don Lemon and Stephen Jackson was about comments being made about Jewish people and prejudices toward them, and how his comments perpetuated types of oppression that Jewish people have experienced throughout their existence, journey, and coming into being acknowledged for who they are as a people group, as a religion, as a culture, etc. And so I'm going, okay. So then I go, oh, I have no context, so what happened? Then I hear Deshaun Jackson. I'm like, you know, me, I'm still out of loop. I'm like, are they cousins? And so the conversation pretty much existed around Deshaun Jackson making a statement, I think directly connected to Louis Farrakhan, who I also have no affiliation with and know very little about in the context of his beliefs or anything else. But somehow he mentioned something about black people being Hebrews, and or true Hebrews, or I don't know exactly how it was termed, and he was forced to apologize. And in the conversation with Stephen Jackson and Don Lemon, they were talking about negative connotations of Jewish people in regards to money, banking, and power and influence within the industry and other places. And he was also trying to get him to apologize for his words and the things that he said. And so I go, okay, well, you know, people talk, people have thoughts, whatever. Then literally a week later, an interview done with Nick Cannon and a gentleman, I do not know his name, but from what I've read, he is an affiliate or an ex-affiliate with a group called Public Enemy. I don't know anything about Public Enemy. I know neither one of these individuals as well. And in the process, from what I read, because the interview has now been taken down and has been removed and apologies have been had, so, you know, let that lay. But from what was contextual, what was, I guess, what was taken out of the general context of the conversation, whether it was contextual or not, I don't know, because I didn't see the original video. But what was said was along the lines of that black people are the true Hebrews of the Bible. And he talked about melanation and prejudice and racism, amongst other things. And when he made these statements, he was then pretty much shunned by Viacom. Other people had a lot of things to say, and he started off by, you know, being in this place of, hey, I was just having dialogue, I'm open to future dialogue, we should have conversations around this. If I'm wrong, I'm open to being educated. And the end result at 7:08 yesterday was a full-out apology for being anti-Semitic because he had a thought. So I'm going to give you 3 definitions before we continue forward. And then we're going to kind of wade in this water of thought, prejudice, and anti-Semitism. And what is actually happening in regard to, one, freedom of speech, and what kind of precedents are being set when thought, prejudice, and anti-Semitism all kind of merge into one place. Okay, so let's talk about thought. What is thinking? Thought encompasses, and I'm looking at a more general definition, an aim or a flow of ideas and associations that can lead to a reality-orienting conclusion. Okay, that was a quote. And so thinking, just the process of having stimuli, it coming into the brain, and then it causing us to then ruminate and ponder on and try to make sense of it, is a natural human process. And it's so human and it's so beautiful. What makes us who we are. The ability to think, the ability to have free will, the ability to come to conclusions is very much a right of humanity. It's not something that someone can infringe upon, and it's not something that should be infringed upon. A person thinking is natural, okay? Thinking, the process of thinking, allows us to make sense of the world around us. So some things just sometimes don't make sense, and children do it all the time. So many of you, if you don't know, I spent a lot of time working in preschools, and in that time, it allowed me to understand the neurological functioning, whether it was neuroplasticity, how children learn, how to create environments where children learn, how to create inquiry, and to allow children to think and become more solidified in their surroundings, to be trusting of the world. And so much of that is rooted in their ability to be able to think, question authority, and how we deal with them, and how we create boundaries, and even disciplinary functions, whether it's time out or writing or expressing, to convey with me thinking, and even erring in my thinking. And no one should be offended in the process of one's thought process, if you will, because that is their natural right to make sense of the world around them in the context of who they are in that world. So they are an individual in this world, and the whole world has information, and it's acting upon them, and the right of humanity is to react to that world and to gather information to make sense of the world that they live in. Okay, so this includes making predictions about the world, right? This is basic scientific inquiry. Hypothesizing, like, if A plus B equals, C, then what if B plus A, equals C, or what if C plus B equals A, and turning this thing around to see if it makes sense. That is normal. And what also is normal is thought also turns into conversation. A child comes up and they go, "Mommy, if I take a ladder and put it on the roof, can I get to the moon?" And we go, "Well, not exactly." And then it opens up the dialogue to understand astronomy and distance and how things function in the known world. But it starts off with a thought or with an idea that may be off base, or may even challenge. A lot of times, if you're a parent or if you've been around children, you know that a child's thoughts can even challenge what you believed about the world. They can say, did you know that when bugs do X, Y, and Z, that it actually, you go, "Huh, I never really thought about it that way." And then it begins what? It causes you to think. And then maybe it'll even begin a dialogue, and sometimes even a friendly argument of like, "Well, how do you know that's true?" "Well, where did you get your information from?" And it creates a trust within the world that my thoughts and my inquiries and my perception and my prediction about the world are welcomed, and that dialogue can be had about it in a way not to just silence my voice, but also to give me a better understanding of how to use my voice and how to understand the world around me. I hope that makes sense. Okay. It helps us, thinking helps us meet our needs. It gives us an objective, and it allows us to have desires and make plans in order to accomplish goals. What are the goals? What is the end game for what we're thinking? And that's why being able to think is so important. Okay? Laying that framework. The next thing is prejudice. What is prejudice? And I'm looking on Wikipedia. If you know Wikipedia, I would not say it is the best, academic source, but it gives enough information for us to kind of get the basic of what prejudice is. So, prejudice is, and I'm reading from here, is an effective feeling toward a person based on their perceived group membership. Okay? So it's how we feel about a person based upon the group they're a part of. The word is often used to refer to a preconceived, usually, not always, but usually unfavorable evaluation of another person based upon that person's political affiliation, sex, gender, beliefs, values, social class, age, disability, religion, sexuality, race, ethnicity, language, nationality, beauty, occupation, education, criminality, sports team affiliation, or other personal characteristics. Okay, so it can cover a whole broad, blanketed area. Okay, prejudice can also refer to unfounded or pigeonholed beliefs. So unfounded is you can believe something that can just be flat out not true, and then you could use that belief to then discriminate or have beliefs about something and push those beliefs upon other people. Now, something being unfounded can also be relative to the information that is commonly known to the general populace. Sometimes there are things, and we find this out every day. Every day we're learning. If you are being educated in this world in any way, if you're reading, if you're walking around, you'll find that there are things that you don't know. So you could believe, that, you couldn't splice an apple tree and a peach tree. And then all of a sudden you find out somebody has. Before, that could have been completely unfounded until somebody did it or until the information came to the surface. So that is also, once again, broad, okay? And it can also include, so this is prejudice, any unreasonable attitude that is unusually resistant to rational influence. Now, once again, rationality is also objective, and it's also rather ambiguous. I'll use a very touchy subject, but I think it'll give us some reference for what can be rational or irrational. Most people think it is irrational to look around what we call America and say, hey, this land was kind of encroached upon by colonizers. And although you've amassed a lot of wealth and you've built up this nation, it actually belongs to people who were originally here who were killed and raped and displaced for the advancement of the American dream. We should do something about that. When that conversation first came on the table, do you think the person that brought that was seen as rational? I don't think so. It was so irrational that we're only now barely a fraction seeing the conversation between the natives and the encroachers upon this land, saying, you know what, we should give them back their tribal lands, we should give them back these areas, and even then it's still not equitable in any stretch of the imagination when all of something was yours and now you get back a fraction of it. But that conversation at one time seemed very irrational to the people who said, but it's ours, and we got it in their minds fair and square. So what is rational influence may not seem rational to one group, but to another group could seem very rational. So when we're operating based upon definitions, we have to always remember that there is a person defining, and the person making the definition has a bias in some way or another. Definitions are not always fluid, and they don't always properly represent the other side of who that definition is being made against or for. Okay, so Gordon Allport defined prejudice as feeling favorable or unfavorable toward a person or a thing prior to or not based on an actual experience. Osted defines prejudice as characterized by symbolic transfer of a value-laden meaning, content onto a socially formed category, and then onto individuals who are taken to belong to that category, resistance to change, and overgeneralization. So an overgeneralization can be a prejudice, and a resistance to change, right? A resistance to change or thought can also be a prejudice. And let that kind of sit there. Last but certainly not least, and I will not do this any justice. I want to let you know that right now. I think it's a personal responsibility of each listener and learner to really, really dive into the background, whether it's historical, political, or cultural, of anti-Semitism as a whole that I'm going to give you. some definition, because I know it's something that a lot of people have not had, conversation about. And when you hear this term, we hear things a lot of times, and then we don't know what they mean, and then we just repeat them, or we say them, or we tie them to people without knowing the actual context of what the word means. So anti-Semitism is hostility to, prejudice, which we just talked about, or discrimination against Jews. Okay? A person who holds such position is called an anti-Semite. Anti-Semitism is generally considered to be a form of racism. I think because anti-Semitism applies specifically in this context to Jews, we have to define what Jews are. Not in a way to be anti-Semitic, but in a way to understand what Jews are and how you can discriminate against a group based upon their affiliation to, or because of their cultural identity, or historical identity. Okay. I also want to note that anti-Semitism does not include other Semitic peoples. So anti-Semitism is not used for the Semitic people known as Arabs. Anti-Semitism is not used in conjunction with the Semitic people known as Ethiopians. Anti-Semitism is not used in the context of the Palestinians. So it's specifically in this context because of its I'm trying to find the right word. Its political definition is pretty much only in the context of Jews. So let's look at how Jews are defined. Jews, Yehudim, or Jewish people, are an this is now I'm reading from Wikipedia again, and then I'm going to give you kind of a biblical rundown of who Jews are as well. Are ethno-religious group and a nation originating from the Israelites and Hebrews of historical Israel and Judah. Okay, so Jews, Yehudim, or Jewish people, are an ethno-religious group and a nation originating from the Israelites or Hebrews of historical Israel and Judah. Okay, the account of historical Israel can be found in history, and it's also found in the Bible. Okay? Jewish ethnicity, nationhood, and religion are strongly interrelated. I want to add that this definition went directly to Jewish ethnicity, but it should include Hebrew ethnicity, Israelite ethnicity, Jews, and Yehudim are a nationhood, a religion, and all of their ethnicity, nationhood, and religion are strongly interrelated. As Judaism is the ethnic religion of the Jewish people. So Judaism is the ethnic religion of the Jewish people, but we must also add that Israelites, Hebrews, Yehudim, and Jews are also termed in this definition. So I don't know specifically, based upon this definition, if it's making a demarcation between Judaism being the religion of just Jewish people, or if all Jews and all Israelites were also participating in Judaism. Why I say that is because Abraham is the father of, which we would call the biblical faith. He's like the hub of it all. And Abraham was not a Jew. I know that may be shocking to some people because, we hear about Jewish people, he wasn't Jewish. Abraham was a Hebrew. And as a Hebrew, Abraham was the father of the faithful, and then he is the father of Isaac and Ishmael. Those are brothers. Isaac is then chosen, and then Isaac has a son named Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons who become known as the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's name was changed to Israel by Yah, and so you have Israel, and from Jacob forward you have Israelites, and then from one of his sons, the fourth son, Judah, you get Jews. Okay, that is very important because Abraham was not a Jew, and Abraham did not start what we know as Judaism. Abraham was a Hebrew. and he had the faith that was given to him by Yah. That's in the book of Genesis. You need that to be known. It's very important, because before you get even into what we consider Jew or Jewish people or Yehudim, there is a whole establishment of faith and people practicing that faith even before that point. And those people were also chosen. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob were also chosen, and they're a set-apart lineage that then becomes the forefathers of what we know as the Israelites. And then one of the tribes, specifically the tribe of Judah, are considered to be Jews or Yehudim. And then eventually there becomes a kingdom split, and then you get the northern tribes and the southern tribes, and then, then it becomes a more general term for those who live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem. Okay, but there's historical context, and I just wanted to give you that. Okay, so now that we have that understanding of who Jews are, right? Let's go back to anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism may be manifested in many ways, ranging from expression of hatred of or discrimination against individual Jews to organized pogroms by mobs, state police, or even military attacks on entire Jewish communities. Although the term did not come into common usage until the 19th century, it is also applied to previous and later anti-Jewish incidents. And so it goes through all of them. So we're talking about the Holocaust, anti-pogroms in the Russian Empire, Spain, Ukraine, massacres, Jews in Black Death, the Edict of Expulsion, and the First Crusade in 1096. The root word Semite gives the false impression that Semitism is directly against all Semitic people, and we covered that. Which it doesn't include Arabs, Assyrians, Arameans, and we mentioned Ethiopians, just to name a few. The compound word anti-Semitism or anti-Semitismus was first used in print in Germany in 1879 as a scientific sounding term for Judenhass or Jew hatred, and this has been in common use ever since. So the term had this fundamental, meaning, and it's carried forward and backwards. This is very important. The term is not only triggering, but we can also say, because, and I'm speaking as a person of color, as a so-called black person, that certain things can be triggering for us. Our experiences can trigger us to view anything anybody says now, and I'm talking specifically about black people now, as racist. So I understand sitting on the side of a disenfranchised people, and we'll get further into that in a little bit, that certain terms and certain things that people say can be triggering, even if they don't directly relate to what we experienced in the past. And so it seems like this, everything going forward, everything going backwards, defined as anti-Semitism, is a way to kind of stop the bleeding and stop the trauma and stop the things that have been done against a particular people. Okay? I don't know if we have a term for that as black people, so-called black people, but hey, that's fine. So now that we kind of understand anti-Semitism and how it has been used, I wanted to go through and look a little bit at the definition of it, because we're going to kind of touch on this whole issue of anti-Semitism, how it's used, and then we're going to deal with what do we move forward and what do we do. Okay? Though the general definition of anti-Semitism is hostility or prejudice, we talked about prejudice and how it can be a little ambiguous, against Jews, and according to Olaf Blacksake, has become an umbrella term for negative stereotypes about Jews. A number of authorities have developed more formal definitions. Holocaust scholar and City University of New York professor Helen Fain defines it as a persisting, latent structure of hostile beliefs toward Jews as a collective manifested in individuals as attitudes, and in culture as myth, ideology, folklore, imagery, and in actions, social or legal discrimination, political mobilization against the Jews, and collective or state violence, which results in or is designed to distance, displace, or destroy Jews as Jews. Now, we know from our definition of Jews kind of what we're looking at. Whenever a definition is made, and especially when a definition is made in a, it becomes a legal, it becomes legal. The definition becomes legal, and how you fit into that definition then directly affects you. So you have to understand definitions and how they're used either for you or against you. Elaborating on Fain's definition, Dietz, Bering of the University of Cologne, writes that to anti-Semites, Jews are not only partially but totally bad by nature. That is, their bad traits are incorrigible. Because of this bad nature, 1, Jews have to be seen not as individuals but as a collective. Jews remain essentially alien in the surrounding societies. 3, Jews bring disaster on their host societies or on the whole world. They are doing it secretly, therefore the anti-Semites felt obligated to unmask the conspiratorial bad Jewish character. For Sonia Weinberg, as distinct from economic and religious anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism in its modern form shows conceptual innovation, a resort to science to defend itself, new functional forms and organizational differences. It was anti-liberal, racialist, and nationalist. It promoted the myth that Jews conspired to Judaize the world. It served to consolidate social identity. It channeled dissatisfaction amongst victims of the capitalist system, and it was used as a conservative cultural code to fight emancipation and liberalism. If you want to continue through, go for it, but that is where we're going to kind of rest. So it's this idea that anything that's said that negatively propagates this particular group, the Jews, is then completely obliterated in society based upon the definitions of what the Jews term as, or what the legal term of anti-Semitism is. Now we're going to get into the statements that were made by Nick Cannon, Deshaun Jackson, and Stephen Jackson, in general, not just the statements, but to focus in on one particular term, because I think the overarching issue is that there is a buzz amongst specifically Black people in America and abroad who are in search of lost and stolen identity. And within this buzz is the conversation that the disenfranchised and systemically oppressed and removed peoples of the transatlantic slave trade have direct connection in one way or another to the Hebrew people of the Bible, and or the Israelites of the Bible. And that in the transatlantic slave trade and in the intercontinental persecution of the Israelites from the Romans and from many Muslim faith-based nations or in that area, that throughout the diaspora these people have come back and have regained the identity that was then removed due to this oppression. For me, personally, I feel like, okay, let's have that conversation. But in the media, when that conversation has come up, and this is not the first time, for those of you hearing this and seeing it happen amongst Deshaun Jackson or Stephen Jackson or Nick Cannon, this is not the first time this conversation has come up. What I think has happened in the past is, one, the people who vocalize these concerns about the suppression of portions of history based upon their thinking, thought, and deduction have have not had a platform to vocalize this information, or it's been rather underground. But if you look at the ACLU and you do a simple search, you'll find that black people have been claiming Hebrew, and specifically Hebrew Israelite descent, for a very long time now. This is not new information. There were people who came out of slavery retaining, based upon their oral narrative and history and written history, the portions of their identity that pertain to them being Israelites. So this is not new information. This is not something that previous Jewish people or Europeans in this nation, Americans, and even blacks have not heard before. There's actually a whole lot of black people, so-called black people, who under the identity of their Hebrew heritage have not only made Aliyah, but have practiced and lived multiple generations of the lived their culture. I don't think it is also against anyone, just my thoughts, for a person to find out that they have cultural heritage and begin to take on that cultural heritage and live it out. For instance, there are lots of European Americans who know they are Scottish, and they may have not found out until they did a search, or they find out that they're related to the Queen of Scotland, and then they have a Scottish crest up in their house, and they begin to take on that identity. So I personally do not think there is anything wrong with searching out your history, no matter how far it goes back, and grabbing onto those portions of history and beginning to live them out in a way that not only positively reflects your culture, but also positively benefits society. And I say that because if people are making the claim and also living out their Hebraic heritage, their Israelite heritage, then Torah makes them better people. It makes them better people for the planet. It makes them loving, caring. All the negative prejudices and stigmas that are attached to the so-called black people, in my opinion, begin to dissipate and fall away when Torah becomes the guiding factor for them. So black on black crime, I'm using all of the stereotypes right now. Black on black crime, theft, teen parenting, black men in prison, single parenting, all those things begin to immediately crumble. And what's left is, Torah as a foundation to build upon, to then boost and advance the black community. I don't see black people seeing themselves in the biblical context and doing the research and saying, I'm going to live out this particular way because I have historical connection to these people and I want to do better. I don't see that as a negative. And I don't think anybody else would either in that context. The issue is, for me, and then this is back to the conversation surrounding Nick Cannon and others, and anti-Semitism. I might also add in, I'm not, because I don't know anything regarding that, so I'll leave that out. The issue is that people are thinking, and as they begin to think, their thoughts are being muted. Do we really, truly, at the root, have an issue if, I say that rather facetiously, but if black people, the so-called Negro, the refuse of society, those who were kidnapped, captured, raped, sold, disenfranchised, systemically oppressed, police brutality, educationally removed, those who were removed from every area because of prejudice and racism. Is our problem that this is a lie? Or is our issue that it could be true? And the reason why I say this is that what's happening within the Black community surrounding the conversation of Hebrew Israelites comes because of a suppression of truth. Okay? Suppression of truth. The overall suppression is the narrative concerning so-called Black people is housed firmly in the cotton fields and in the rice fields and in the cane fields and in the plantations of slave owners. The conversation concerning the so-called Black people never gets to advance past that. To the point that when you talk about other areas that were heavily populated by so-called Black-skinned people, we will attribute the genius of it to aliens, or we will say it never happened. So when Black people began to read and begin to research and begin to travel, the narrative housed in the cotton fields, cane fields, rice fields, and plantations of slaveholders begins to unravel. And what seemed to be a truth is now only partial. And when a truth is partial, then there has to be an additional narrative. And when the narrative is so egregious, so disgusting as it pertains to Black people, then there is going to be a pendulum swing from I am nothing to who am I? And as people begin, specifically Black people, begin to educate themselves in the text that have been suppressed and in the history that has been suppressed, and even more specifically in the biblical history that has been suppressed and omitted, then there are going to arise questions. The questions would have never existed if the narrative was kept complete and whole from the beginning. If pictures were not changed, if translations of things were not covered, and if identities that exist on stone walls were not whitewashed in future history. It leaves people to deduce that there has been an error in the commission, if you will, or in the conversation regarding the historical context of who Black people, specifically Blacks who were a part of the transatlantic slave trade and the intracontinental slave trade within Africa and the Near East regions. It leaves question. It leaves one to think, and it leaves one to try to make sense of the world around them in the context of who they are. It puts the Black person back into that childlike state of, can I trust the world, and can I trust the information that the world has given me? And based upon the history of Black people, the answer is no. No, I cannot trust the world. I cannot trust my religious organizations. I cannot trust political organizations. I can't even trust who I know to be in this common time as God's chosen people, because it seems like everyone has omitted portions of who we are. I'll say it like this, for specifically Jewish people. Until the conversation surrounding Hebrew Israelites came up, there were many Jewish rabbis and people who didn't even think twice about the fact that their synagogues, being God's chosen people, them, right, were not full of this disenfranchised group. It was full of, white converts, and maybe some Black and Ethiopian people who had joined into synagogues, but overwhelmingly, the synagogues within our communities are Jewish. They're very much filled with European Jewish people. And until the conversation amongst black people and amongst those Hebrew Israelites and others, and Hebrews and people who had connection, even Ethiopians, came up, most people had no idea that a black person could even be a Jew. I've talked to plenty of rabbis and others who, some, they don't teach it, but if you ask them, then you say, are black people also Jews? Like literally, racially, ethnically, culturally, were they a part of the biblical text? And they go, well, of course. Who would say they weren't? But that's not common information. And so when information like that is not taught and it's suppressed, then it's going to leave an area of distrust when people start reading the stories here and start looking at maps and start looking at locations, start traveling to museums and start seeing Assyrians and Persians and Babylonians and ancient Hebrews with braids and beards, and you start to look around and you go, oh no, there's a part of the history of the biblical connection of different ethnic groups, right? Different people with different visage. It's not just what we've modernly seen. And so what do you think that does to the mind of people who have been told that they are nothing, that they come from nowhere, and that they have no connection to anything of God, and that actually they had the curse of Cain placed on them, and that's why they have black skin? What do you think that does when you find out that the relics and the monuments and all the things surrounding the ancient Near East are heavily melanated? It's going to cause extreme contention. And it gets worse when we get to modern time. We deal with people like Nick Cannon and others who are beginning to question the narrative of a very, very concealed history when it comes to history just in general. When they begin to question it and you tell them, shut up. You don't know that that actually makes it worse when you tell a person who asks a question to shut up, because then we go, well, why do you want them to shut up? What nerve have they, what nerve did they strike? Where did they upset the apple cart? And when it constantly seems to surround this phrase, true Hebrew Israelites, right? Then it makes people dive further into it. So I'll ask this. Who finds a lost brother and tells him to shut up? When we talk about inclusiveness, and when we talk about the ability for all people to be accepted for who they are, and even in this world, who they believe they are. Some people believe they are other things that some of us may agree, well, you don't quite look like what you think you are. But we are told in our society that people should have the freedom to think, believe, and act in the way that they, in the core of them, have conviction that they are. But when it comes to black people, and when it comes to being a Hebrew Israelite, that doesn't fly. We all know from history, we talked about this a little earlier, that Abraham had Isaac, who had Jacob. I'm giving the streamline of the chosen lineage as it pertains to the narrative of Scripture. Jacob's name was turned Israel, and he had 12 sons. Those 12 sons are known as the children of Israel. They go into Egypt, and they come out a mixed multitude and a great nation. Okay? Then you get the history, and they stay in this region, they conquer, we get our King Davids and our Solomons and our Messiah, and all these things happen based upon the full report of the Holy Bible. There's the story of the Bible, and it's the chosen, if you will, amongst his brother. And he had this coat of many colors. You guys have probably seen the play on Broadway that has zero context, a lot. Not much to the Bible, but Joseph, coat of many colors. His brothers are like, he has these dreams, he can see things, and his brothers hate him, and they think to kill him. And instead of killing him, his brother is like, no, don't kill him. Let's sell him to, off into slavery. Okay, so this brother is sold off into slavery, And it ends up in Egypt. Egypt is called Mitzrayim, also termed the house of bondage. And this brother ends up in Egypt, and he has a bunch of very unfortunate events, literally. He starts working for this guy. He said that he raped her and or tried to come on to her, and he ends up in prison. He's in prison for a very long time. 2 other men get brought into prison. One's a cupbearer, one's a bread maker or a chef. And he has this dream, and he's able to interpret the dream. And he tells these guys, "Don't forget me." Well, they forget. And it comes along that the Pharaoh of Egypt has a dream. And the Pharaoh has a dream, and he's asking all these people, like, interpret my dream. But also, I'm not going to tell you my dreams. And so he goes in, and Joseph says, my job is not to interpret dreams, and, that's the power of the Creator. And so, but I'll pray and I'll see what happens. The Most High gives Joseph a string, and he interprets it, and he literally saves Egypt. I'm getting to it in here. Joseph begins to, in a lot of ways, assimilate. He marries an Egyptian wife. He has 2 Egyptian children. And in that process, he saves Egypt and then the whole world. Because a famine happens, and he is given by Yah the wisdom to pretty much make Egypt the wealthiest nation ever by getting land for food, because they stored food. But also, he, in the process, able to save his family. Now, this is where it gets back to my point. So, Joseph's family comes down to Egypt, and they don't recognize him. Right? He is so Egyptian, and he must look so much like the Egyptians, that they don't recognize who he is. And they come and they ask for food, and his brothers, he ends up doing this thing where he doesn't tell them who he is. He invites them to eat, and he's like, "Oh, don't you?" They had who's your family? He's like, "Oh, I have a younger brother." He said, "Bring him." "Oh no, my father's gonna die. If you bring this brother, he doesn't come back." This whole thing happens. Eventually, Joseph reveals himself. When his brothers find out that he's alive, they bring his father and all his family back, and the family rejoices that Joseph has retained his identity, remembers who they are, and then essentially saves everyone. Right? This is like the best story ever, because without the identity of Joseph being retained, and without Joseph continuing to follow Torah, and without Joseph keeping Torah and keeping his heart right, the Israelites would not exist as a people. Who, finding their lost brother, weeps or mutes him. What do they say? "We don't want your help. We tried to kill you. Go away. Somebody else help us." No. Torah says we should rejoice in the gathering back of the lost. Somebody claiming to be lost and finding Torah to a Jew should not be a bad thing. Should not be a bad thing. Based upon the comedy, come here, right, as Jews, come here, let's have this conversation. Let's talk about it. What have you discovered? Shut up, black boy. We pay to, I'm not saying Jews, but the media, the world in general said, "Shut up, black boy. We pay you to make us laugh. You can make us money. You can make yourself look like a buffoon. You can talk about you can talk about white people, you can talk about anybody. But when you talk about this, direct connection to the issues concerning racism with black people. The fact that the media and the world can rally around as a black man, because remember, black people are not allowed to think, let alone read, let alone have a solid opinion about anything of their own. And as a black man tries to develop a thought based upon the world and how it has interacted with him and his people, and in his own research and study, and the world and the Jewish community rally around and say, "Shut up, you're not allowed to think in that area." And then when conversation was said to be had, the conversation happened behind closed doors, that was not made privy to other black people who were influenced by his thoughts. And now we don't get to get the narrative or the education. And once again, history, information, and rhetoric becomes private and suppressed and focused on one individual when there's a whole community looking for answers. If it had not been for the omission of truth, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Because the history of blacks has been snubbed out of books, it's been kept as a footnote, and like I said, it exists primarily in the context of slavery. The conversation about the thinking that many of us are doing has to come to the table. And those who have a voice cannot allow that voice to be silenced. We have to, and I'm saying we, as a collective of those who love truth. Let the Creator be true, and every man a liar. So if I read this book, the Holy Bible, I read Tanakh, and the Creator, the Elohim of this book, gives instruction and gives historical context, that is where my weight is behind. It's not behind the Hebrew Israelite. It's not behind Jewish people. It's not behind Europeans. It's not behind Americans. It's not behind Israelis. It's not behind, African Americans. My weight has to be behind the truth and the validity here. And that is the foundation on which we will discuss the issue of the omission of history. Black people specifically, I'll speak to in this context. You have to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. As you begin to tread into the waters of seeing if the world around you is not merely a house of cards, you have to tread lightly. Because systemically, our oppression allows us not to speak. It allows us not to think. It prohibits us from having individual thoughts and opinions about things that have already been established while we were in chains and shackles. A lot of the rhetoric surrounding a lot of history is without dissent because we were prohibited from reading, from writing, and from having opinions. As we begin to become educated and ask for rights and social justice, you can't keep apologizing for things that you have not been allowed to have conversation around with your community. When you go behind closed doors and you have a conversation and then you remove your words that have now provoked thought, you create a bigger issue than there was even before. I don't agree with any type of anti-Semitism, and I will echo what I have heard from other people, and I agree with it. Me, myself, if you would like to have this dialogue, my people have retained their oral history as far as who we were. On my mother's side, I'm not completely sure of the complete narrative on my father's side because his mother was orphaned, his grandmother was orphaned as a child of a half Native American and half Black Union. So the narrative there is a little muddled. But on my mother's side, we have retained not only our history, but our location, and we have kept Passover since we were able to as a people. So that's very important. That is kept in not only our oral history, but the matriarchal side of my family retain that information in writing. And so when I say there are those of us who have and are willing to have the conversation regarding the disenfranchisement of Hebrew Israelites who were taken in the transatlantic slave trade, my family specifically on Dutch slave ships, and brought here into this land. That conversation has to be had, and that voice cannot be muted because it makes some people feel uncomfortable. I will also state this, that a lot of the conversation had has to come from a place of knowledge and not a place of YouTube videos and rhetoric that is being regurgitated from other individuals. This information has to come from concrete study, from original languages, and it may take you to have to get up and go see some of these places and see people and have these conversations. Because as long as you get behind a closed door and a person gives you 6 facts or 6 reasons why what you said was wrong, and you apologize, then you dismantle the advancement of those of us who are crying out for a voice that gives us the opportunity to live out our true identity without being seen as anti-Semitic. You cannot be Semitic when you are Semitic. And the definition needs to come under extreme scrutiny that anti-Semitism only protects one particular people group because they're the people group that fought for the right to not have anti-Semitic rhetoric used against them. It is anti-Semitic to silence the voice of a Semite crying out for redemption and recognition in the midst of police brutality and other extremely harmful acts to a particular people group. Anti-Semitism as a definition has to be modified to fit those who are Semitic, who are walking out the way of the Semite in this country, whether or not, based upon the definition of right of return, your direct grandparent on your maternal side is a Jewish person of European descent or came out of directly the Holocaust. We have been scattered as a people to the 4 corners of the earth, and the prophecy written in scripture states that people will begin to wake up to their identity, especially in the land of their captivity, and they will cry out to their creator. That cannot be suppressed by any group, even groups claiming or living out Torah in their individual capacities. It is completely and utterly disgusting. Who's going to bring forth truth? Was it upsetting that a person disagreed or thought or theorized? Or is it upsetting, and I'm going to say it because what do I have to lose? Or is it upsetting that if it is true that people of color, specifically the black disenfranchised in this country, are for sure the Hebrew Israelites written about in the book of the Bible, that it upsets the comfortable apple cart of white supremacy? Is that the issue? Because if Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel were all envisaged, would be considered black men, then what does that say about what has been done to the so-called black people brought here in the transatlantic slave trade? What does that say about those who have held, raped them, and bred them like cattle? What does that say about the execution of judgment upon not only this nation, but every people from Spain to Portugal to Britain to Europe to America to the islands and abroad? What does that say about the judgment that is now coming to the world for what has been done to Yah's children? Is it the fear that people may misunderstand and may think something different than the narrative that has been set forth? No rebuttal, no conversation, muted. You seek to destroy this man's family by pulling out from deals that obviously are how he eats and lives. But who is going to be bold enough to lose everything for the truth? The truth comes with a high price. And the more those of us who are conscious of our heritage allow the truth to be muted, we are setting a precedence or how we will be dealt with for having these same thoughts and opinions regarding our identity. It is becoming now a crime, if you will. It's not being enacted by the government, but it doesn't have to be. It's being activated by the common populace against people who say that they have a biblical connection, to mute them, to take away jobs, and to bully them into suppressing their voice. It is a problem. Why are these conversations not public? Why can you demean and force a person to apologize and not hear what they have to say? I watched Steven Jackson talk to Don Lemon, and when he said he didn't mean anything by his comments, he was then made to feel like he meant something by his comments, and the conversation that never came up was, well, let's talk about the root of where these comments came from. Because I promise you, if he began to dive into history and context, he would have been overtalked and muted, and the television would have gone off, and something more favorable would have came on. Stop bringing us onto your platforms. Stop having conversations regarding what we think, and refusing to have the conversation in the same manner about what we're saying. This goes to, and this becomes personal for me, this goes to the Jackie Hill Perrys and the Preston Perrys and the religious groups who have begun to snub their noses at those who want to move further in their understanding of not only history, but in the things that have been removed. If slavery has hidden history, what makes you think history doesn't have hidden history? It makes no sense. What did you think was going to happen when you suppressed history? Last, certainly not least, Black people are not the first people, and I'm saying about these so-called blacks in America who have been disenfranchised and those who have been scattered also throughout the transatlantic slave trade, are not the first people that claim to have Hebrew heritage. There are people on islands. There are people in the mountains of China. There are people all over the world that have claimed to have connection with the biblical Hebrew people. Why is it such a problem when the so-called black says it? We really have to get to the root cause before you guys continue having conversations, especially with the media and with your friends and in the broader general context as it pertains to Hebrew Israelites. You have to understand history. You have to understand migration. You have to understand genetics. You have to understand that just because things seem to be one way, they may not be that way. I will also tell you that trying to generalize all quote-unquote Jewish people, as many Hebrew Israelites would like to frame them, you have to be careful there as well. You have to be careful. Everybody has to be careful. We do have to tread, not lightly, tread heavy, but do it with knowledge and understanding. Because the moment you allow yourself to be discredited because of your words and your generalizations, they will shut your mouth with anti-Semitism and make you beg and grovel at their feet for a crumb from the master's table. Don't be a Nick Cannon. Don't be a Steven Jackson. Don't be a Deshaun Jackson. Don't be any person who doesn't believe their own thoughts and stops seeking to understand the world in the true context of how it was understood, how it was meant to be understood by the Creator. I'm going to finish today with, I'm going to read the Bible. Why not, right? Let's read Isaiah chapter 59. And I'll say this to you while I'm looking for Isaiah. If you are ashamed of Yah before men, Yah is going to be ashamed of you in the judgment. You don't backpedal on truth. and this has nothing to do with Nick Cannon or anybody else, because I don't know what his truth truly is. But you don't. Truth is worth dying for. Truth is worth losing everything for, because truth is what has to prevail. It has to. It has to, it has to, it has to. You have to be bold for truth. And truth initially is offensive. But when you handle truth correctly, and not in a way to demean or debase anybody else, but let truth be truth. Like we said earlier, let Yah be true, and every man be a liar. Charles Spurgeon once said that if you let truth out, it's like a roaring lion, and it will devour. It'll do what it'll do. You don't have to validate truth. You just have to live truth. So for those of you who are seeking to reclaim your identity, stop seeking validation from the same systems that have muted you and oppressed you. Be who you are, and then by being who you are, it's undeniable. I will also say this. Scripture teaches that the one who is going to make known who you are when it's undeniable is the Creator. It's not a personal feat that any of us are taking on. Our job is to wake up, to repent, and to be who we have always been. When you start trying to fight the battle against anyone, you fail, because we are weak and feeble. We are weak and feeble until we literally put Yah as our stronghold and as our fortress and as our shield. Isaiah 59. Behold, Yah's hand is not shortened, that it cannot save, neither is his ear heavy, that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have separated between you and your Elohim, and your sins have hid his face from you, that he will not hear. For your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken lies, your tongue hath muttered perverseness. None calleth for justice, nor any plea for truth. They trust in vanity and speak lies. They conceive mischief and bring forth iniquity. They hatch cockatrice eggs and weave the spider's web. He that eateth of their eggs dieth, and that which is crushed breaketh out into a viper. Their webs shall not become garments, neither shall they cover themselves with their works. Their works are works of iniquity, and the acts of violence is in their hands. Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity, wasted, and destruction are in their paths. I didn't put this down in my notes, but I need to say this. You have to understand that truth is more valuable, and I said this briefly, than you. And I mean this. Let go of your egocentric need to save yourself. And now this is not talking about the preservation of life, but a lot of reasons why a lot of voices can be muted is because of the wickedness that a lot of people have done behind closed doors. And they're afraid of the world knowing that they were either homosexuals, that they have done rituals with Satanists, that they have participated in probably Epstein's ring of child pornography. A lot of these people can be shut up because they're afraid of the world knowing who they really are. But let me give you a aha moment. Yah already knows. As we were reading through Isaiah 59, this thought came back. He already knows your hands have shed blood. He already knows that you're wicked. He already knows that you're deceitful. He already knows that you're debased. He already knows that you have done everything but, well, in a lot of ways, sell your soul. And as you're trying to wake up, the oppression of your previous actions have muted you. Be okay, Nick Cannons and whoever else, with all that stuff coming out. What do you care if you're trying to wake up to who you are if you lose everything, if people think you're the worst person on the planet. The reason why the narrative is given for all the wickedness of everyone in Scripture so that they could stand firm in truth. The reason that David's sins were blasted out front, the killing of Uriah, his child dying, his daughter being raped by his son, all of these things, is that in all of that, in all that everybody knew about him, the one thing you cannot say about him is that he did not have a heart after Yah. Because with all of the vileness in his life, he constantly returned back to Yah. That has to be your refuge, and that has to be the place that you rest assured. Because there are going to be many more celebrities and other people who have participated in a lot of debauchery to get where they are, and that stuff is going to come out. Stop letting people silence you with stuff that you did. You did it. It's true, and Yah knows. Yah knows, and that's more than any person knowing. It's not going to discredit you to the people who truly know what repentance looks like. A lot of us, not wanting to admit it, have had to repent from a lot of jacked up backgrounds. And we have chosen, a lot of people have chosen to hide behind the guise of religion and fear the enemy's exposure of who we are. But guess what? You're still that person even if nobody knows it. Don't be afraid of the one who can destroy the body. Be afraid of the one who can destroy the soul and cast it into utter hell and damnation. I had to say that. It was just like, it popped up in my head again. All right. So Yah's given the rundown of who Israel really is on the inside. We're not going to call a person anti-Semitic for calling us on who we really are, because Yah does a lot of calling us out on who we really are. Have we shed blood as a nation? Yes, we kill a lot of babies. And that's the present context. In our history, done a lot of other wicked things as well. Have people in our history participated in homosexuality? Absolutely. Have people been with underage women? Absolutely. These are things that Yah has spoken of. So to shy, and not in the sense of shying from your sin, but to shy from being bold for Yah and be bold in truth because of your past and because of how that's going to be perceived to the world or to your families or to other people, it's not even necessary. It's already recorded. Yah has already put you on blast. Verse 8. The way of peace they know not, and there is no judgment in their goings. They have made them crooked paths. Whosoever goeth therein shall not know peace. Therefore is judgment far from us, neither doth justice overtake us. We wait for light, but behold obscurity, for brightness, but we walk in darkness. We grope for the wall like the blind, and we grope as if we had no eyes. We stumble at noonday as in the night. We are in desolate places as dead men. We roar all like bears and mourn sore like doves. We look for judgment, but there is none, for salvation, but it is far off from us. For our transgressions are multiplied before thee, and our sins testify against us. For our transgressions are with us, and as for our iniquities, we know them. We know. We know. Yah knows, and other people know too. In transgressing and lying against Yahuwah, and departing away from our Elohim, speaking oppression and revolt, conceiving and uttering from the heart words of falsehood. And in judgment is turned away backwards, and justice standeth afar off. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. Whenever we cry out, truth falls in the street, because we're afraid of all the stuff we stood before. Yea, truth faileth, and he that depart from evil maketh himself a prey. When you depart from evil, you make yourself a prey. That is what Yah says. When you do it, when you step away from that system, and you say, I'm not living like this anymore, I'm not suppressing truth, I'm not going with the rhetoric, I'm walking in the knowledge of who I am and my responsibility to the Creator, you become a prey. No, you are prey. And Yahuwah saw it, and it displeased him that there was no judgment. He saw that you were made a prey, and he was going to do something about it. And then you flip-flopped. For he put on righteousness. Oh, wait, let me go back, sorry. And there was no judgment. Verse 16. And he saw that there was no man and wondered that there was no intercessor. Nobody's going to say anything? Everybody's scared? Everybody's scared. Like everyone. Okay. Therefore, his arm, he had to do it. He brought salvation unto him, and his righteousness is sustained in him. He had to do it himself. That is why we hope for our Messiah, because when we hope in people, and we hope that people will have a voice, we hope that people will speak up, and we get all happy when a person posts and says, oh, we're the Hebrew people, and they delete their video. Or they say something and they transfer it to another platform. He's saying, oh, you're playing scared. But I knew you would, because you've become prey because of your knowledge. So I have to send my arm and my salvation to do the work. I'm going to send my Messiah, because guess what? This is really kind of a little ratchet, but he ain't never scared. He's not afraid. He's not afraid to stand up. He's not afraid to speak out. He's not afraid of what people can do to him, because he understands the ultimate end, and your redemption is hanging in that balance. So he does it. Yah does it with his own arm. I'm going to read that again. And he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor. Therefore his arm brought salvation unto him. He does it with his arm for himself. And his righteousness, it sustained him. For he put on righteousness as a breastplate. He's girded up right now. Can you imagine like this picture of the Messiah? Like, okay, you guys can't do it. I get it. Slavery, disenfranchisement, bully spirituality, systemic oppression, it has you weak and feeble. Well, I'm girding up. I got it. For he put on righteousness as a breastplate, and a helmet of salvation upon his head. And he put on the garments of vengeance for clothing, and was clad with zeal as a choke. Can you imagine that? So when you get this whole Roman soldier, when Paul talks about the put on the full armor of Yah, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the full armor that the Hamashiach is going to wear in order to stand against your enemies. And according to their deeds, accordingly he will repay fury to his adversaries, recompense to his enemies, and to the islands he will pay recompense. Those who are our enemies are his enemies. Fear no one. Yah had to tell the same thing to Samuel. He's like, the people, they don't like me. They want a king. They're upset. He's like, they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. They're not rejecting you when you tell the truth about what Yah's word says. They're rejecting him. They're rejecting his way. They're rejecting his people. He comes and he fights for his name's sake. Verse 19. So shall they fear the name of Yahuwah from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun. When the enemy shall come in like a flood, the spirit of Yahuwah shall lift up a standard against him. Don't worry about the enemy. It said the spirit of Yahuwah shall lift up a standard against him. Verse 20. And the Redeemer shall come to Zion, and unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, saith Yahuwah. Verse 21. As for me, this is my covenant with them, saith Yahuwah. My spirit is upon thee, and my words which I have put in thy mouth shall not depart out of thy mouth. Stop taking back the words that Yah has put in your mouth. He said, nor out of the mouth of thy seed. We're never going to stop saying who we are. And the mouth of thy seeds. I will teach my children to remember who they are, saith Yahuwah, from henceforth and forever. Shalom.